Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tuesday Tips with Kimberbell. I'm Kim Christofferson, and today we thought we would go over some tips and tricks for using the orange pop rulers. Now, I know this is something that's been around for maybe a year or two now, but we still continue to get questions about it. There are so many people out there who absolutely swear by these and they love them. If you're one of those people, we'd love to hear from you in the comments and tell us what you like about them and how you use them. But there are still many people that are not quite sure how they work because it is a little different. But I promise you that once you get used to how these work, beyond what a normal ruler can do, you're going to be sold and you're going to absolutely love using your orange pop rulers. This is something that we use every single day here at Kimberbell on all of our products, and it's something that I have my own set at home and I use it so many times. So here is what it would look like when you go into your store. There is a rectangle set that you see over here, and then there is a square set. Now, within these sets are additional rulers. So you're going to get a whole lot of rulers for the money. For example, for the square set, I've got the 3 here. And we've got the largest one, which is an 8.5 by 8.5 inch square, a 6.5 by 6.5, and a 4.5 by 4.5. But then with that also comes a half square triangle ruler that fits right in there, okay, for 2 different sizes. And then with the rectangle set, which I'm going to show you how I'm using today, again, you have 3 different rulers with the different sizes, and then you also have additional rulers like 2 flying geese sizes of rulers here, and you have a tumbler block and then a 1/4 inch ruler, which I'll show you how much I love this little guy here in just a minute as well. All right, so why use orange pop rulers? Well, I want to show you a couple of examples of Kimberbell product that uses these. But I also want you to remember that even if you are not doing a Kimberbell project, orange pop rulers can be used beyond just Kimberbell. We've seen people use them for t-shirt quilts, denim quilts. We've seen all kinds of uses for them because they are traditional size quilt blocks. So think beyond just Kimberbell, but know that here at Kimberbell, we use them with all of our projects, or at least a great majority of them. All right. So here's an example of the Ginger's kitchen bench pillow, just in time for Christmas, right? This actually is something that we use the orange pop rulers for nearly everything. Everything that has the applique designs on it, we use these rulers for. If you've done the Love Notes quilt, for example, here's a look at that. You'll remember that we often referred to the orange pop rulers for that Love Notes quilt because what it can do is that it helps you visually center your design after you've stitched it out with the ruler. Again, I'm going to show you here in just a minute how that works. Before you cut it. So you don't have to worry about all the extra measurements of, how far do I cut over to the right, to the left, from the top, from the bottom. But it also helps you with cuts similar to this, like on this mailbox where it had to rest right along the seam. It can help you visualize that again before you cut. So they're really fantastic, like I said, for not only Kimberbell, but for all kinds of quilt projects. All right, now another thing I'll make mention is that, of course, what I showed here, let's see, this was a machine embroidery version. This was actually a sewing version. So what I'm saying is that whether you sew or machine embroider or hand embroider, you can still use these rulers for all of those reasons. All right, so here's an example from Vintage Boardwalk. This is a Kimberbell pattern that came out last year, and one of the designs was "Life is a Beautiful Ride." All right, now in the instructions it would say, okay, once you've stitched this out, well, let me back up a little bit. It would have you cut your block a little bit larger than what the finished design is. All right, and we always like to do that because whether you hand embroider, whether you sew or machine embroider, when you've done that, when you go through that process of doing that, it always pulls in your fabric. So if you were to start off with the exact block size that you needed for a project, inevitably it's going to shrink down the size of your block after you've stitched onto it. And then when you go to put it in your quilt, that's when you see that things don't match up, okay? So what we do is we start with a larger block, okay? And in the directions on this one, I'm trying to remember, I think it was a 6.5 by 8.5 inch block size that we wanted you to cut this down to in order to fit it perfectly in the quilt. So I might think, okay, 6.5 by 8.5, well, let me think. 8.5 divided by 2 would be 4.25, and 6.5 would be 3.25. You see where I'm going with this? You got to do some math. Now, not too bad, right? But then I get to something like this, and I'm going, I don't know if I want to measure from here out, and so there's a lot of guesswork. And oftentimes we end up cutting a side off, and it's either too little or usually it's too much, and then our block is off centered. So with the orange pop rulers, you can visually center your design before you cut. Let me show you how. I'm actually going to stand up here because that would be my first tip is to not try to do this sitting down, okay? Now the other thing that you're going to notice here is that I have a rotating mat. I cannot tell you how important that rotating mat is for the success of cutting these blocks, okay? So I'm going to take my rectangles, rulers, and I'm going to look, see on each one of these, I don't know how well you can tell on camera, but there is a 1/4 inch graph line here, and it's a little bit raised so you can feel that. It also has engraved in there what the cut size is of that block and what the finish size after you were to sew it together. Okay, so this right here is my 4.5 by 6.5 inch block. Now remember, I said 6.5 by 8.5, but here's a little tip. I actually want you to go ahead and start with the smallest size to see if it's centered, okay? Now, I can do this easily because of those graph lines that are on there. I can tell, let me make note of this, you're going to be cutting on the inside. Normally, we're used to cutting on the outside of a ruler. This time, we're cutting in the window. We're cutting inside, okay? So, again, this bigger size is what I'm going to get to here in just a moment. But I'm always going to start with the smallest size possible because I can visually see that, for one, if I were to cut this right now, I'm going to have problems, right? This is going to be sewn into my seam and it is too small of a block. But what it does do is it helps me see underneath where the grids are that this is centered on all sides. Okay, now from there, this is the size I want. It's one size up. It's a 6.5 by 8.5 inch block. So I'm going to nest this one on top of the other. All right, and guess what I'm doing with this? I'm taking it out because I now know that this is centered. Now, if I wanted to, I could start all over. I could get the exact size quilt or frame that I needed and put it on there, right? And I could say, you know what, I want it more in this corner, so I'm going to place it over there. I'm going to want it in this corner, or I want it centered. This is where I can take my 1/4 inch ruler and also help measure all the sides to see that it is centered. All right, so I really like that for that reason. Or again, I could just visually look at it and go, you know what, looks good to me. I'm ready to do this. Okay. Again, a tip would be to start with your smallest ruler. Make sure that is centered. Then place what the ruler is that you need on top and remove this. And my third tip is to actually take the next size ruler and just nest it on there. Just pop it on there. Orange pop rulers, right? And place it on there because guess what? Now I have more of a firm grip on this. I have more surface area for my hand to hold onto this ruler. So I'm going to use it to my advantage by having an additional ruler on top. I certainly could cut with just this, but you know what? If I've got it, I'm going to place this on there and cut on the inside. Now, another thing you're going to notice with our rulers is that there are these extended corner channels in each corner. All right, that's really important too, because what will happen is you will take your regular 45mm blade and you're going to slide it in that extended corner channel and cut along the inside of that frame. Then you turn your mat and cut the next side and so forth. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. Now, there is a question about those people who are righties versus those people that are lefties. And I want to make sure and answer that right now because it's really, you just have to think a little bit differently. I'm a right-handed person. So since I'm a right-handed person, and this is probably opposite in your screen here, but since I'm a right-handed person, I'm going to start cutting to my left. A lot of people who are right-handed think, oh, I've got to cut on the right-hand side. But the problem is that your blade will not rest up exactly against that side, and that becomes an issue with sizing, right? So if I'm a right-handed person, I start to my left and I cut. But just the opposite, if I was a lefty, of course, I'd have a different side of the blade this would be on. If I was a lefty, you know the answer. I'm going to start to my right and cut that way. Okay? So, very important to have that figured out, right? Again, if you're a righty, do not start on the right side. You'll have problems. But I promise, if you will start on the opposite side that you think, you're going to be good to go. Okay, so let's see how cool this is. I'm going to hold on to this. Now, I want to make mention that in your package come these no-slip grips that you peel and stick onto the back side of it so that it helps prevent shifting on your fabric. Okay, so I'm going to start in this extended corner channel. I'm just going to cut all the way up there to the top. There's no damage to either the blade or the ruler when I do that. And then I'm going to turn. So I physically don't have to move my body or move this project except on the rotating mat itself. Okay, so simple. Now, when I've done that, I can now see I have got the perfect size block for my project. Isn't that great? Just really, really fantastic. Again, it helps you visually see before you cut, and that makes all the difference in the world, my friends. Now, if you are nervous about using a rotary cutter, and I understand that, that's not a problem. I'm going to give you another little tip. Say, for example, I'm going to use the Let Your Cares Drift Away. And I'm going to I want this to cut into a 4.5 by 4.5 inch block. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my square rulers, all right, and I'm going to place that right there. This is the 4.5 by 4.5 inch size, and I could either visually look at it and see that it's centered, or I could certainly use my 1/4 inch ruler and see that it's centered. Okay, so now remember, this is the size I'm cutting. I'm cutting on the inside, and because I'm a righty, I'm going to start to the left. If I was a lefty, I'm going to start to the right. Now, because I have these extra rulers, I can use them to my advantage. I could certainly place this on top and nest them together, and now I have more surface area. I could even take the next size ruler and place it on top and use that one. And then I could go about cutting. But again, if you're nervous about using a rotary cutter or you're nervous about slipping, here's what I want you to consider. You could actually take a water-soluble pen and mark your frame, okay? And by doing that, you don't have to worry about that ruler slipping. You don't have to worry about getting not close enough to the blade or to the side. You could just use that to your advantage to say, look, I framed it up and now I know it's centered, and now I could take like a regular ruler or even the side of one of these. And if you are more comfortable with cutting on the outside edge, then absolutely you can do that, okay? And cut it out that way. The 1/4 inch is already built inside that seam allowance, so you don't have to worry about cutting it any extra larger than what it calls for in the pattern book. Now, another reason why you might love the orange pop rulers is because, as you know, with Kimberbell, we love dimensional elements. It could be fringe, it could be like these little papers coming out of the typewriter, it could be extra flowers, it might be all kinds of things. And if you can imagine this with me, if I had something that had bulk to it, maybe it's even, we placed foam underneath an applique piece to give it a little poofiness. If I were to take a regular ruler and place that on top, you know what's going to happen. It's going to wobble because it's not flat. So again, another reason for loving the orange pop rulers is that everything that you just stitched is on the inside and it's in that open frame. You don't have to worry about not getting it placed on there correctly. So that again is another reason why I just absolutely love them. All right, so do we have any questions? I hope that tutorial helped. Any questions at all? Now I know earlier I came across one where someone said something about a stitch line. They wish that it was just the stitch line that was on your machine. Well, the problem with that, I can absolutely see what you're saying. But when we get into that works quite well when you're working with like a really small block, like a 2.5 by 2.5 inch block. That would be okay. But when you're working with larger pieces of fabric, anything over 2.5 inches, then you, just by stitching that line on there, it's still going to pull in your fabrics. And if you stitched that line, especially at the beginning, you're absolutely not going to have the exact same quilt block that you started with at the end that you did have at the beginning. So you can't count on stitch lines for that. That's going to take you off even by 1/8 of an inch, which you add up those inches together and you're really off in your seam allowance. So anyway, that is why we do not recommend that. We also use these orange pop rulers for our background quilting designs. So, the designs that you see at kimberbell.com for background quilting, we use the orange pop rulers to cut that block apart after it's been quilted as well. So anyway, there is that. There's no questions at all. Wow. Okay. Well, I hope that helped you, understand a little bit more about why we created the orange pop rulers and how you can use them not only in Kimberbell projects but all kinds of other projects as well. If you have any further questions, please leave a note in the comments and we'll be sure to go back a little bit later and answer everything that we can. Thanks for joining me today. I will see you next week on Tuesday for Tuesday Tips with Kimberbell. Thanks. Bye-bye.